Welcome back to 27 Perspectives, sending to you from the European Parliament in Strasbourg. Today we are here to discuss Europe's digital future. I have two guests with me, Mr. Dragos Tudorache, Vice Chair of the Renew Europe Group from Romania, and Mr. Patrick Breyer of the Group of the Greens from Germany. Thank you both so much for being here with us today and helping us discussing this interesting topic. The digital transformation is one of the most important global issues at the moment, and many nation states have their own transformation plans to address it. Europe is pursuing a program paper entitled Path to the Digital Decade that is setting up several goals and guidelines that the EU wants to pursue in terms of its digital transformation. In your opinion, what is the most important goal that the EU has when it comes to its digital transformation? Well, that's a tough word. I'm going to stumble over that a couple of times today. And also, what are the biggest challenges it is facing right now?
I think the most important goal that we have set ourselves is to design the digital era in line with our rights and values. And we have a strong protection of fundamental rights in the EU, but digital technology also has an oppressive and authoritarian potential. And so it will be a great challenge to align technology with how we want to live, how we want to be.
Mm-hmm. How about you?
Well, I think bringing a balance between what I perceive to be the two big objectives in this digital transformation is going to be key if we want indeed this transformation to be a success for us. Because on one hand we have, and this is where I fully agree with Patrick, we have a human-centric element to this transformation which needs to remain at the core of all our efforts. It has to be built around the interests of individuals, around the rights of individuals, because that is the only way that technology can be trusted and can be uptaken. But at the same time, we have a goal of competitiveness, because digital is going to drive and is already driving our economies to the future. And therefore, we also have a duty of care to how we set the rules and how we set this agenda in a way that, again, keeps our economies functioning, that are going to be powered up by digital technologies, also, in fact, to the benefit of our citizens. So in a way, the two objectives are not exclusive of each other. They can be made compatible with each other, but again, if we pursue this objective in the right way.
Thank you. One of the more controversial topics regarding the digital transformation is artificial intelligence. While some see this technology as the opportunity of the century, others are afraid that it bears many risks for our society that are hard to foresee. What opportunities, but also risks and dangers do you see?
Well, I am the co-rapporteur of the Parliament on behalf of the Civil Liberties Committee on this very important piece of legislation. Of course, I'm subjective, and I consider it to be probably one of the most important pieces of legislation during this mandate. And in this file, you have, just like we discussed before, you have a combination of opportunities brought about by these technologies, and we have to recognize the potency in the positive sense of AI. It is already influencing in a good way many areas of our economies, areas of our societies, the interaction between us as human beings, between us and the authorities, and so on and so forth. But at the same time, it does bring also challenges. It does bring risks as well, because AI right now is building on amounts of data, whether taken from existing data sets and databases or from the World Wide Web, which are rigged, many of them, with many of the prejudices, many of the biases that we have historically carried on in our societies. And I think the challenge will be to make sure that in this virtual world of tomorrow, which is being built and powered up by AI, these biases, these prejudices are not carried over and accelerated, in fact, by technology. So I think, again, this is where we have to find the middle ground that maximizes those opportunities, which are real, which are there, which are present, and we also have to explain those opportunities to our citizens, while at the same time curtailing those risks and challenges. And I think the Act does exactly that. I think is, of course, we have to tweak it, and this is what our work is right now. We are negotiating hard in Parliament to reach, hopefully soon, a common position. And that work that we've done over the last year has been in finding that balance between these two fundamental interests.
Would you like to add?
Sure, yes. You know, artificial intelligence is a buzzword, so we're actually talking about machine learning, and machines are not intelligent. They're quite stupid and have a lot of limitations oftentimes. And so to give 3 examples of where this technology can be used to dangerous and risky ends, and I agree with the opportunities part, but there are also other examples, of course. First of all, biometric mass surveillance. So we're seeing in France, they are rolling out legislation that would allow them to use this technology on crowds, on sports events, to automatically report persons for behavior that is not like everyone else. Which means that if you behave differently, you will be reported to the police, which has an enormous chilling effect on our public spaces if this is rolled out. Or to give another example, the EU is researching a so-called a video lie detector technology. So these are claimed to be able to tell if someone who wants to enter the EU, a traveler, is truthful or not. But in actual fact, this technology is so error-prone that it's more like a lottery, and people can arbitrarily be reported for lying where they are telling the truth. So this is voodoo technology that doesn't remotely have the reliability to be actually used in practice. I can name some others, but maybe later on.
If I may add,
Sure.
because these risks that Patrick mentioned are indeed real risks, and that is why, in fact, for example, real-time biometric recognition in public spaces, just like predictive policing, in fact, are part of those applications that right now in Parliament we are discussing for putting them in Article 5, which is the article that deals with the prohibited uses of AI in the EU, which shows what? Which shows that with this legislation we are looking at what are those areas where AI can be used with such detrimental impact, such detrimental effects on our privacy, on our rights as citizens, that we simply, according to our values in the Union, we do not want them deployed, developed at all in the Union. And I think we're making a very powerful statement with this legislation and with this list of prohibited practices, which also includes social scoring, the likes that we see in China being used on a mass scale, and few other applications which, again, remain, I think, congruent with our values and make sure that this technology is used only for good and that we put the right guardrails in place to make sure that such potentially dangerous uses of the technology are not something that we would like to see in Europe.
Thank you. Mr. Tudorache, you're not only working with AI, you are also part of a committee that deals with one of the most controversial digital technologies of our time, namely the Pegasus surveillance program, software, pardon. Can you briefly tell us what that is and what makes it so dangerous?
Well, it is very simply a software that takes over your phone, your mobile device, number one, without you knowing. Number two, without you having to do anything. It's a zero-click, as they are called, technology. So basically, it is invading your privacy, your life, because we have to admit right now we do hold a very important part of our lives in our mobile devices. And it does so, again, by breaking every possible rule that we have in terms of controlling abuses against our rights. That is why we are looking very seriously in the work of the PEGA committee as to how such softwares were purchased by governments in the Union, how they were used. Of course, it's not simple because we come across a blockage of information coming out of governments. But I think our duty with the work of the committee is to shed as much light on the first of all on the use and on the effects of such technology, and also to suggest ways in which, at least at European level, if not maybe providing a model for a more global response to these technologies, on how we can actually set some rules in place for the use of spyware as well. What has to be understood, and that's really serious, unlike every other type of surveillance that was used until now, telephone tapping, other type of wiretapping, this goes beyond any of that, because the moment that your phone is being taken over, there are no limits. The temptation to actually extract data from that phone that even go beyond the mandate that might have maybe lawfully been obtained from authorities, this potentially is something that, again, is characteristic to this technology, and is what makes it so powerful and so dangerous as well.
Right. Mr. Breyer, how do you feel about politicians being systematically spied on potentially using this technology?
First of all, the reason why it is possible to take over our devices is because they're not secure. So the manufacturers are so far not liable for these vulnerabilities that make it possible to invade the phones. And no legislation imaginable will prevent foreign intelligence services or even criminals from using these opportunities once these vulnerabilities are there. That's why I think we need to be much more clear on the obligations of the manufacturers. And secondly, let's not forget that the EU itself is proposing to implement a scanner on every of our device that would screen our private messages and photos, and that is so error-prone that it would reveal many intimate conversations and even photos to an EU authority in the name of protecting children, certainly, but in the vast majority of cases, this would actually basically affect persons that are acting completely legally and sending very private, intimate communications. So this so-called child protection regulation is a real risk where the EU itself is trying to basically take over devices and undermine secure encryption.
Where do you see the EU's responsibility lies on the scale of protecting personal data or perhaps protecting people through spying on others?
Well, I think here we cannot be shy about our duty. I mean, already we have set a global standard in terms of privacy and protection of personal data with the GDPR. And I think history has shown that we have done right by doing that. And also we have, again, set a model that many around the globe have followed. But I think the challenges that these new technologies, these new spyware technologies are bringing about are far greater than what was imagined at the time when the GDPR was created. That is why I think there is now a need to bring further instruments. Patrick says that maybe legislation is not enough, but I think legislation always in every domain can be circumvented. There will always be those criminals or those abusers that would go around the law, any law, and break it. But at least you need to have rules in place to know what is right and what is not, and what is punishable and sanctionable and what is not. And also you need transparency. And from my point of view, if we are to maybe achieve one thing out of the investigation that we do in the PEGA committee, one key recommendation that could maybe and hopefully be followed through by the European establishment institutions is to bring transparency, to force governments into being transparent about the purchases and the use of these technologies, because at least then we can start building safeguards. Right now we don't even know. We hear from the producers of these technologies that they have sold them to our governments. We ask our governments, they say they don't know. And that vacuum of information, I think, is the worst of all worlds. So at least we need to flesh this out. We need transparency rules in place, and then also build safeguards on how these technologies are to be used.
Thank you. Now, digitalization also creates new inequalities and power dynamics. This is especially true for global tech corporations like Google or Meta. How does the EU deal with these new economic monopolies?
One thing that we have done is impose interoperability for messengers, meaning that the monopoly or near monopoly that a company like WhatsApp has on messenger communications will be broken up by requiring that service to interoperate with other messaging services, so that you will be able to stop using WhatsApp and still stay in touch with your contacts that you have on WhatsApp. And this is a model for other technologies as well, like social media platforms. We've all seen the consequences of the Twitter takeover, and yet we can't leave that platform without leaving behind all of our contacts and followers. And if we imposed interoperability on these platforms, you'd be able to switch, and users would have a real choice. There would be a real competition on the most privacy-friendly, on the most secure platform, and not the one that basically locks you in and exploits you to their commercial advantage.
Well, I will add that I think the entire landscape of rules that have come out of the Commission during this mandate, from the Data Markets Act to the Digital Services Act, to from the Digital Markets Act to the Digital Services Act to the Data Act, Data Governance Act, and now with the AI Act, not that they were dedicated to the big platforms, but I think they all have effects on the behavior that global that big tech has on our markets. I agree with Patrick. I think the unbundling effect that would be achieved through the DMA is a very important element. The responsibility for content that the DSA brings in is also a very important role, particularly because it puts specific obligations on big platforms in terms of the structural risks that are contained in the way their algorithms are functioning, and then all the way to the Data Act and the Data Governance Act, which are changing the rules on how data flows and how it is managed and used, by also giving more control for the data owners, which is us in terms of private data, of personal data. So all that landscape, I think, does have a good effect, a strong effect into how to discipline the behavior of big tech on the market. But the challenge now is on how all of these new rules will be implemented. We have not yet seen these effects. We have now DMA, DSA adopted already for some time. We will see how the implementation of these rules will be done, because if we don't ensure also in the way our national authorities will, national regulators will work, if we're not ensuring a proper implementation, then again, it will remain a paper tiger. And that's one thing that we don't want.
If I may, have a bit of a different perspective on the Commission's work in this area, because I perceive them as very industry-friendly, and Thierry Breton himself, of course, used to be leading a tech company in France. And I think this shows in the legislation that they are proposing, you know, that the interoperability, the game changer that we've been discussing, was introduced by the European Parliament, not by the Commission. And also, when it comes to the DSA, the Commission complains about illegal content and disinformation, but the one thing that's responsible for it, the algorithms that actually spread this kind of content, because it will generate revenues for the platforms to push content that's controversial, that basically upsets people. That one thing has not been tackled. It's unrestricted to keep using these engagement-based algorithms. And that's why the entire regulation will not have a lot of effect, in my opinion, on illegal content and disinformation. They will remove certain pieces, but it'll mostly be too late, or they will be replicated elsewhere. The algorithms will keep working. What we proposed is a kind of interoperability of algorithms, to be able to use different algorithms than those offered from the commercial platforms, that you would be able to configure yourself, that would not be optimized for maximum engagement and controversy. But that was not wanted, not even by a majority in the European Parliament, because it would have challenged the business model of these platforms that, of course, rely on this surveillance capitalist business model. And so I think we are not going far enough to really address these problems, and there's a lot of more work needed.
What measures is the EU taking at the moment to, for one example that you mentioned, address the spread of false information?
Yes, basically what their solution is a code of practice to address disinformation. But on the one hand, it doesn't go far enough by basically not tackling the algorithms that spread this kind of information. And on the other hand, there's a risk that we're establishing a ministry of truth. Who is to decide and to know if a piece of information is true or false? That can easily result in censorship. And in my opinion, it would be much better, rather than remove pieces of information that somebody decides they think is disinformation, it would be much better to basically allow for fact-checking and to enable users to understand the value and reliability of an information source. That is something we all need to learn in the digital age, and that we all need to become better, and we can engage the community to expose false information and myths.
Do you have a different perspective?
I have a rather more optimistic view as to where we have arrived and what we have achieved over these past couple of years. Let's not forget that we started from a couple of years ago when we had nothing, when we had, let's say, a lawless virtual space where all of these algorithms were roaming free, producing their detrimental effects. And here I fully agree to the cohesion in our societies. Then we had the code of conduct, which was not perfect in itself because it was a voluntary framework that companies either chose to respect or not. But now we have hard rules in place. Are they perfect? Are they to everyone's liking? Most likely not. And we hear Patrick not considering that they are sufficient. But we have these rules. We have redress mechanisms in these rules which allow, like never before, those affected by these algorithms and by these platforms to actually have a voice, to raise issues of concern. We have obligations put on these companies, particularly on the big platforms, to address the systemic risks. Will they be able to address them properly? Well, this is again a responsibility for those that will be guarding the implementation of these rules to make sure that they do. So this is why I was saying earlier, a lot of the effects that we're all hoping that these rules will have will also rest in how actually they will be policed. And we need a very vigorous enforcement on the side of the national authorities, on the side of the Commission, for those where the Commission has a responsibility to, again, make sure that they are effective, because otherwise, again, we are back to square one.
Of course. Now, at this point in the interview, I have to tell you that some of the questions I've asked you today were in fact suggested by artificial intelligence. Considering such rapid technological developments, what social consequences should the EU prepare for, also concerning the labour market?
Well, I'll start by saying I'm not surprised. This would be the third or the fourth interview that I gave where I'm responding to questions produced by ChatGPT. As to the social consequences and what we have to be mindful for in the future, I think clearly, speaking of ChatGPT, but not only, AI in all of this transformation is having a profound effect on and you mentioned labor market, let's start with that. Mm-hmm. It will have a profound effect on the labor market. Why? Because it's going to change a lot of the architecture of the jobs that we have right now. Some of them will be completely done away with. I was reading recently an article about that case I think it was in Portugal or Spain, if I don't remember, where in a library they have asked AI to sift through the thousands of manuscripts that they had in the archives to basically start discovering who are the authors of those manuscripts which had not been attributed to any author until then. And the algorithm managed to do that in a matter of hours, which is work that the librarians probably would have required years to perform. So again, technology will be changing the way many of our jobs look like, but not necessarily in a bad way. The way I see it, maybe it's an utopian vision that I have, but the way I see the role of technology in the labor market is by facilitating a lot of the tasks that we have differently in our jobs, not necessarily eliminating those jobs, but actually allowing more time for creativity. Just like we discovered during the pandemic that by working remotely from home, we can actually achieve a better work-life balance. In the same way, by maybe eliminating some of the repetitive tasks, some of the research tasks that we all have in many of the jobs that we do, that will also allow us time to, again, bring more quality, more creativity, have time to do some other things, bring a better work-life balance. So again, we have to look at this like with every other industrial revolution that changed the face of the labor market. We have to see it just as another episode in these sequence of industrial revolutions and try to make the best of it. For that, we also need to look very seriously at our education system, of course, because it changes also the kind of skills, the kind of competences that we have to put on the table of our children so that they are better equipped in the future to deal with this transformation. And of course, we cannot let behind those that are already in jobs, that are already in the labor market and who will need to adapt, and therefore reskilling and upskilling during their jobs is something just as important.
Mr. Breyer, do you share the optimistic vision of a digitalized labor market?
Yes, I do. I don't think there is a reason to be afraid of the digital era. Of course, there are many changes and transformations, but digitization is one of them, and it has always been this way. So, of course, we will need to be ready to learn for a lifetime and also develop our knowledge. But you know, taking the example that you gave with AI generating questions, I think if you want to have a tough interview and you want to have good follow-up questions and react to what speakers said, or if you even want to develop a profile over several programs, I don't think an AI will be able to do that. I think it takes a good personalities to be able to do that. And so I don't think it's a threat to journalism. And it's the same with other economic areas. So I think that we will find ways to use these technologies to our good. But I also agree that with technology taking over so many tasks, we need to think about our dependence on labor and jobs in general. This week, the European Parliament adopted a resolution on a basic income. So the idea of shouldn't every human be entitled to a certain income that they can use no matter what and how they work, if it's paid work or if it's unpaid work, like caring for persons in your family. And this is something that we need to debate intensely as technology is taking over more and more labor. We should think about ways of, keeping the people safe, even if their job is no longer needed.
Now, one of the examples you gave was taking care of family members. What would you say to people that argue that, in fact, digitalization is going to widen the social gap because those jobs cannot as easily be taken over by machines as, say, an office job?
Yes, it is possible. They will try to roll out technologies also to care for people, but and maybe machines are better or robots are better at doing that than having nobody at all. You know, there's such a shortage in personnel, but I don't think it's worthy of humans to be under control by machines at all the time and to basically leave technology to deal with them. I don't think it disrespects them and the value of humanity. So I don't think this is a future we should work towards. And that's one of the areas where it's possible to use technology, but it's not right. And it doesn't comply with our values to do it to the extent that is possible.
All right. The global digital transformation is not only about economic interests, but also about geopolitics. Those states that possess the critical infrastructure of digitalization, such as the means to produce microchips, for example, have a major influence on shaping the policies of today and tomorrow. Some even call it a digital arms race that we're in. Where is the EU positioned in this digital arms race?
Well, first of all, I think by acknowledging that this race exists is already a very important step that the European Union has taken. Understanding that indeed technology, AI, and all other cutting-edge manifestations of the digital transformation, let's put it this way, are becoming geopolitical tools. Because whoever has the upper hand in, for example, preparing standards, writing rules, determining the direction that some of these technologies are taking, will have a competitive edge, and also will manage to, again, make those rules applicable and uptaken across the board on a global scale. And I think in this particular area of writing rules and preparing standards, I think we are quite well positioned because we have taken these roads of writing rules about AI, of creating boundaries for how data is being used, creating this body and this framework for the digital transformation, which many around the world are looking at with interest. And we have a lot of like-minded partners out there who, although recognizing that they would not be immediately taking the same path as ours, they do see the need for aligning with many of the elements that are part of our vision. And I think this is an important step that the EU has taken. Of course, we cannot only rely on rules. Just being a mega regulator doesn't mean that you are also competitive, which is why we also have to pay attention, as I was saying earlier, to how we also equip our business, to how we equip our workers, to how we equip our societies with staying part of this digital transformation, with staying part of this race, understanding what are the stakes, the challenges, the opportunities, and actually playing them out, because otherwise we will just remain with the rules, but we will be losing the race at the end. So on both fronts we have to push, but I think that during this mandate we have done quite a number of important steps to keep us in that game.
Okay.
There are those that believe that we should be autonomous in everything, that we should be the leaders in everything, that Europe should be able to do everything on its own. But I'm actually a believer in a good sharing of workload, in multilateralism, in cooperating with each other. And I think it's much better to have a global internet governance, for instance, especially digital technologies. It doesn't make much sense to regulate them at a regional level only. And so I think that rather than going the way that we're going with TikTok, for example, right? Banning one app because it's from China, I don't think that this kind of block work is a good approach to digital policies, but I think we should have values and standards and rules that apply no matter where technology is produced or offered, and we should be consistent in that and not let political judgments or foreign policy ideas influence that. You know, there's a lot of debate about this American approach of buy American first, and should we have it in Europe as well? But I think if everyone did that, then the world would fall apart. We need to have a certain trust and cooperation with each other in the digital age and in a global age. And we can't believe that we are on an island and should be able to work completely autonomously, separate from anyone else.
And are there any particular countries that you think it would be wise for the EU to make their cooperation partner in this?
Well, for instance, I don't think we need to produce everything on our own, but it's also not good to rely on just one country for a certain technology. For example, we've learned relying on Russia is a bad idea, and similarly, where we rely on China exclusively, and for example, during the COVID pandemic, it turned out that certain drugs, a certain equipment was produced only in China, which is also, of course, a mistake. So we need to make sure that we diversify, but that's a general wisdom that should be respected, and it doesn't mean that we need to protect everything ourselves. So there are geopolitical interests, and belonging to the Western hemisphere and ideals should not mean that we basically need to do everything that our allies and the United States does. we have our own values, and multilateralism and cooperation are principles that we should endorse as Europe.
What measures do you think Europe should be taking to uphold the value of the label Made in Europe when it comes to technologies?
Well, I will complement what Patrick also said. I also don't believe that we should be shutting ourselves off from the rest of the world, for sure. And I don't necessarily like the word made in Europe. I would rather see made by Europe, because that also entails cooperation with others around the world, where I do set a boundary. And for me, that is quite an important thing, and an element that can differentiate how we cooperate around the world is values. Because we are a continent, we are a society, we are a union that is based on values. This is the thing that holds us together and that we hold dear. And therefore, technology and the way technology is being developed or used, whether it's used geopolitically or only as an economic element, still that has a link to the way we understand values, and whether that technology is consistent with those values. So for me, yes, we should remain open and we should cooperate with all those like-minded out there from around the globe that are working on the same value base, but we should be very wary of those that are deploying technologies and that are using this technological race, starting from a different understanding of what is important and what the values are. Again, I think some of the naivety of the past has to be put aside, and again, without meaning that we build a fortress Europe where we want everything to be developed here in total isolation from the world. Certainly that's not a vision that I share. But again, we have to be looking much more closely, particularly in the current geopolitical context, where our values are under attack. We have to be very mindful of that, that cooperation has to be based on that.
Okay. Speaking about the current geopolitical context, how does the EU protect itself against cyber attacks from other nations? Whoever wants to take it.
Well, there's, again, like with the other instruments, there is a robust set of instruments that we have at European level that are looking at cybersecurity. We have agencies that are meant to ensure and work on cybersecurity. We have ENISA that is looking at the security of our infrastructures. We have a new agency in Romania, in Bucharest, which is meant to help create those ecosystems where private sector works together with public sector, because cybersecurity is a whole of society, whole of economy, whole of authorities approach. Just like with security in general, basically vulnerability rests with the weakest link, and therefore this cooperation between private and public is key. And we need to invest in these instruments and the creation of these ecosystems where cybersecurity is being dealt with by all of us, including by us users. We have to understand that we are vulnerable, maybe even more vulnerable when we are online than when we are in our physical worlds, and therefore we also have ourselves a duty to take it seriously in the way we behave on a daily basis in our online interactions.
Indeed, I think that our cybersecurity is at a rather sorry state. In the age of the digital transformation that we are in, it has become a matter of life and death, whether our information technology is safe or not. And we can see that hospitals being hacked and basically a ransomware being placed. We can see that people's lives depend on that, and the same with cars and mobilities in the future, if these are hacked. And unfortunately, they're not secure. We can see that every day in the papers. And so I think that we need to engage the manufacturers and commercial manufacturers much more, because only if they are liable and if they risk high losses in case the quality they produce is not right, only in that event will they be willing to make that investment that's needed in the security of their products and technologies. And on the other hand side, we shouldn't trust technology blindly when it comes to very important infrastructure and matters. We should always make sure that people have a choice not to use technology. We shouldn't force them into digital if they don't want to use it. And we should be aware when we design rules that it is possible to hack, to access data. We've seen data leaks where a lot of personal information has been exposed, including, for example, a Facebook leak where the personal data of many members of the European Parliament and of the EU Commission has been exposed. So we need to be aware, and really preventing the generation and hoarding of data in the first place is often the best security that we can have. So data minimization and protecting our anonymity online, meaning that we're not being forced to reveal personal information in the first place, that is often the best security that we can get.
Mr. Tudorache, do you think it is realistic what Mr. Breyer just said, that we can not force people to take part in digitalization?
Well, I think that's a fundamental right we have to choose the way we want to lead our lives, for sure. Again, we are living in a society, thankfully, we are living on a continent in a union where liberty matters and where personal choices are essential. So clearly people have to be allowed to make their own choices as to how much they want to get digital and how much they don't. But at the same time, I think we also have a duty to explain to people what the advantages of going digital are, so that opportunity is created for them to make an informed choice. And then, because we were speaking of cybersecurity, we have to give them trust that when they go online, that when they go digital, when they decide to move in a virtual world more than in the physical world, that they can do that knowing that that space is secure. Criminals are adapting to the digital transformation just like governments are, just like companies are. And therefore, we have to, again, equip our citizens, equip businesses. And I also agree that there is a very serious responsibilities that companies themselves are in the way they produce product services that are online, that are connected, so that, again, we don't expose ourselves to risks whenever we do decide to go online, whether we want, like we voted today, for the digital wallet, whether we want to choose to have a digital wallet or not, that we have to do it, again, trusting that that decision that we've made is one that is not going to turn against us.
Yeah.
You know, the digitization has a great potential in many areas, but there are also some where it simply doesn't make sense. For example, the European Parliament endorsed electronic voting a couple of weeks ago. And actually, some member states, such as Estonia, already have it in place. But you know, if voting is digitized, then we basically need to trust machines to do the counting and to be secure and not manipulated by others. And that creates huge attack vectors. If the vote counting and everything is taking place inside machines, it's actually easy for foreign attackers, such as Russian-based attackers, to take over the systems and manipulate votes and elections. And that's a huge a risk to democracy. Even only the risk that it could happen is a threat to democracy. We can see in the United States how fears are being spread about voting machines and their security, and it undermines democracy. So that's an area where the use of technology for elections is completely moved in the wrong direction, and I hope we'll not be making that mistake.
All right. Now, as we're about to wrap up, we've talked a lot about the risks and dangers of digitalization. I would like to end on a positive note. Why don't you each tell me your hopes for a digital Europe?
My hope is that digitalization and the digital era will be used to allow the powerless, the citizens, to control the powerful, to have access to information that will allow them to monitor what the governments are doing, that will enable them to organize themselves politically for activism, for advocating for our rights and values and for a better world. And the digital technology has the potential for free speech, to spread ideas, also for whistleblowers to break news that the powerful don't want to be heard. So it can be a great tool in a democracy if used right. It can be used to spread free knowledge, to access information, to create cultural goods. It has huge opportunities, and I'm actually looking forward to that future.
Great. How about you?
Well, I share very much the same vision of a society that is powered up in a positive sense by technology. And as I was also saying earlier, a society where technology has helped us to free up maybe more time, to increase the quality of the jobs we make, to also make a stronger case for humanity. We also speak earlier of humanity versus many of the tasks, many of the world around us that would be automatized and digitized, but it will make a stronger case for humanity, a stronger case for emotional intelligence, because that is ultimately what will make the difference between humans and whatever machines will produce, whether it's text or art or anything else. And that is the kind of digital future that I'd like to see for ourselves.
Thank you for these positive outlooks. And with that, we're at an end of today's episode of 27 Perspectives. Thank you so much to our guests for taking the time to be here today. And thanks all of you for joining us. I hope you enjoyed this episode, and we'll see you again next time.